Welcome to the show, IB Nation Sports Talk. We're up and rolling. We're on the eve of the unofficial start of a new Notre Dame football season. Fall training camp starts tomorrow. Can you feel it in the air? He's Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. You know, in all honesty, even though the official start of the season is still, a month away, I pretty much consider the start of the new season training camp. The team's together practicing now, and I kind of agree with what Karen is saying here. The excitement is starting to build. I feel like this couldn't have come at a better time. I was scrolling through the Champions Lounge today, and we've got fan on fan crime, like jousting back and forth, going at each other. We need some actual football activity to talk about and get people refocused instead of all this recruiting stuff that's going on. What do you think, Jess?
Yeah, I mean, the beginning of the season is, or not even the season, because I'm in agreement with you. When training camp starts, that's when it all starts, because they're progressing as a team, they're developing as a team, and then they're going to start the season, right? And so I would rather see fans, I think, fighting with each other over the stupid stuff than
like once the season gets going.
Yeah, exactly.
Fighting over that kind of stuff, over who should be the quarterback and who's doing, whatever it happens to be. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Jesse, you're a former player. Like, how much juice do you go into, with the first day of camp? When you're all wound up and day one, is it like?
I think it varies.
Like the first day of school for you.
I think it varies. Like your first couple years, definitely your freshman year is like the worst in terms of just being overall scared, not knowing what to expect. You know what I mean? It's kind of like
your head's kind of swimming out there. And
I mean, because you're going into practice and you've had all these meetings and, they're throwing all these concepts at you and that sort of stuff. And, you just don't want to mess up ultimately, because that's the stuff that's going to get you noticed those first couple of days is messing up more so than doing the right thing. Right. So that was always kind of on the, and then as you progress along, it gets more and more easy. But to me, it's like reporting for the first couple of days, it's fun and all because you haven't seen your friends and you're excited to get back out there, but like that quickly diminishes until like the first week of practice for game prep starts, because camp isn't fun by any means. Like it's a lot, there's a lot of practice, there's a lot of film, there's a lot of individual meetings. It's a lot, and at the end of the day, it's not the most fun. But as you go later into your career, it becomes easier and easier because you know what to expect. You understand the format. You know what I mean? You understand the defense or the offense better depending on which one you play. So it definitely gets easier, but it's not an exciting time because of practice itself. It's an exciting time because you're around your teammates and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, Irish Gordian knot. I don't know if you played at any level, but I feel like that's a little unnecessary because football is football, and day one of camp is still the first day of camp.
We were still structured the same way
that you played at. Yeah, I mean, you did summer conditioning, you did all that stuff as well, and camp is camp on day one, so you don't have to be a dick, quite honestly. So, we'll just kind of leave it at that. We are going to get into some off-season grades. That's as we kind of getting defensive like Al Golden. I would say more like Kent Baer. I would think more on that level than Al Golden. Kent Baer was much more defensive than Al Golden, I would say. You say defensive coordinator.
I mean, I would say that the way that programs are run are largely the same. It's just a difference of the talent in the player.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're an FBS football player, there's a difference between every level that's below you. Like there's obviously a vast difference in the level of a Notre Dame football player, even versus a MAC football player versus an FCS, or that's why there's different levels. The skill level is different as you go on down the line. I mean, basically the only thing, that I have to draw on is 1980s high school practice when we didn't even have summer conditioning. So like when we showed up the first day of two-a-days, that was that was basically, like we were puking basically because we didn't have summer conditioning. So it's a lot different even than now because, like even high school guys now, as you well know, had, like the summer conditioning going through the whole thing together and all that different kind of stuff. So, all right, cool. Well, I'll see you later, Irish Gordian Knot. We will check you out. So
I'm excited to get into these grades.
Yeah.
Today.
I mean, me too. So let's just do that, rather than deal with know-it-alls who want to take shots, again, know-it-alls and nobodies who haven't been there at any level before taking shots at people who have. So we'll just switch gears and go to another place. I will remind you for some of the new people who might be checking in tonight to hit that like button if you would, and talk about it all the time. The easiest way to help out both the YouTube channel and the podcast platforms is the like button and the subscribe button. Like if you're listening on a podcast platform, don't just go to IB and listen. Hit the subscribe button because it automatically downloads all that kind of good stuff as well. I thought Irish Gordian Knot, was less a tormentor and someone who could have fun. But the fact that he came in obviously juiced up and wired up and ready to go tonight, whatever. So we won't have to deal with him, at least for the rest of the night. I don't know exactly when he'll come back. So we're doing off-season grades since camp does start tomorrow. And like I said, to me, this is the end of the off-season when we're getting into fall training camp now. And training camp is starting. So I figured what we would do is, just kind of grade the off season basically. And I count the off season, even though there was a bowl game, we don't count the bowl game itself, but essentially, kind of once the calendar hit December, everything but the bowl game that has happened since then is kind of where we will go. So let's start with transfer portal turnover. I mean, obviously, the most notable thing is the addition of Riley Leonard, also the addition of Bo Collins, Chris Mitchell, Jaden Harrison, Jordan Clark, Rod Hurd, RJ Oben, on down the line. Like if you start at the beginning in terms of some of the losses, they lost Chris Tyree, Tobias Merriweather, Rico Flores, Braylon James. The offseason obviously did not get off to a great start with some of those losses. They were all magnified because of, the specific people that they lost. They also lost, though, like Nana Osafa-Mensah, Zeke Correll, Ramon Henderson, Holden Stays, Clarence Lewis, Micah Bell, Ryan Barnes, Antonio Carter, and then, of course, the punter, Bryce McPherson. They also added, I don't think I mentioned Mitch Jeter, the kicker from South Carolina. So like when you look at how everything shook out with the transfer portal, how do you grade that aspect of Notre Dame's offseason?
Yeah, so I kind of thought it would be fun to do like a report card kind of style. And like when we were in film room, and this goes for, every film room across the country, you get either a positive, a neutral, or a minus when they're grading your plays. And basically when you're done, you count how many positives and how many minuses you have. And that kind of gives you your overall grade during that film session. So I kind of thought of a similar approach when looking at, the transfer portal. Like each player, is it a plus, is it a minus, or is it kind of a neutral? And that's kind of what I wanted to go through in terms of how I graded everything. And so like for example, like Riley Leonard, I'm going to give that a plus because you added a, starting quarterback who is going to be in Heisman consideration, who's going to be an NFL draft prospect. Like he is going to heighten your offense. So I give Riley Leonard a plus, right? Like anytime you can add another high-end quarterback as a high-end quarterback is leaving, I would consider that to be a plus. So Riley Leonard was a plus for me.
I agree. I would definitely agree with that.
Chris Tyree, I'm going to count as a neutral because I think his replacement is Chris Mitchell, essentially very similar kind of type of wide receivers. And I'd even maybe give the nod to Chris Mitchell because he actually has more production. And I understand that was at, Florida Atlantic, and it's hard to compare and that sort of stuff. But on paper, I'm good to give that a neutral. Just those are kind of two guys swapping out. And then Bo Collins, I compared with Tobias Merriweather, but I'm going to give the edge to this one as being a plus because Tobias Merriweather really didn't do anything. And, Bo Collins, while his production at Clemson, you can argue, how impactful it was. It's still production, right? At the end of the day. And that was more so than what Tobias did. The only thing that Tobias had going for him is that he was a little bit younger and could have developed a little bit more. But I think that's out the window by now. They needed someone to actually produce at that wide receiver. And so I would give that one a plus.
Yeah. And we are going to get to the coaching, churn here after we talk about the transfer portal players first, because I saw like some comments about coaching and stuff like that. We will get to that. I mean, with Tobias Merriweather, it was all the dreaded P word. It was all based on potential. And obviously, potential recruiting ranking for whatever reason, the wide receiver position, because there have been other guys before Tobias who had the same thing. It's like, is it ever going to happen? Is it ever going to click? And you kept waiting for it. And obviously, based on what they had in the wide receiver room last year, Tobias Merriweather, we all thought that Tobias was going to have a huge season last year. And we thought Chris Tyree would have a pretty good season as well. But you're still talking about a guy with, has checks a lot of boxes in terms of the skill set with speed specifically, but he was still a running back who was being turned into a wide receiver at the end of the day. So that was, that was still based on potential. I think the expectations that were placed on him as well. So I agree with what you're saying.
So then next I kind of look at, essentially what's left out of that wide receiver grouping, are essentially on offense. So they added Jaden Harrison and they lost basically Rico Flores and Braylon James. I'm going to say that's a net negative just because you're losing a lot of depth in the wide receiver room. And obviously that's a big issue right now, and especially because they haven't maybe landed on some of the recruits that were expected, losing, people like Braylon James and Rico who are so young still, right? I think those have to go down as an overall negative. So far we have, Riley Leonard a plus, Chris Tyree neutral, Tobias Merriweather a plus, and then Rico Flores and Braylon James are going to be a minus. So 2 pluses, 1 neutral, and a minus so far. So going on down the list, I think losing Nana Asafo-Mensah. I think that one is another one that's going to be more or less neutral. Actually, I'm going to say positive because obviously RJ Oben, I think, is a step up at the defensive end position. I don't think they're really losing much. Those two are kind of swapping myself.
And on top of that, the development that Josh Burnham has made and the progress that Josh Burnham has made as well probably played into Nana's decision ultimately as well. Like when you sit down and he looked at his play because he was older than Josh Burnham. And, we're hearing good things about Burnham going into fall training camp as well. So I don't think that it is, they're not impacted by the fact that they lost Nana Osafo-Mensah. Let's put it that. And then also you look at the fact that you've got Bryce Young coming in the door. And like, if you looked at some of the stuff that Brian, has on his, on the intel, a lot of good things about Bryce Young. Like, this could be a guy as a freshman walking in the door. If they didn't have the kind of talent that they've got in front of him, he could be in line, to be a starter pretty early on, but they don't have to push him into that because of the fact that you do have RJ Oben and Josh Burnham there as well.
So kind of moving on. No, I just there's a lot to.
I mean, you can give your evaluations, and I'll kind of throw my 2 cents in.
Yeah,
as we go, because I agree with a lot of what you're saying. So,
Zeke. So next up would be Zeke Corral. While it's unfortunate to lose an experienced offensive lineman, I do believe that Zeke Corral was undersized, and I also believe that he reached his ceiling in terms of talent. I think that there are guys on the roster that have the potential to be better than Zeke Corral, but they're just young, and it's maybe going to take a game or two. And so I think we can't rush to that evaluation so quickly because it's going to take time for the whole offensive line to get synced up together, right? And I know that largely starts with the center. So while losing an experienced center sucks, I do believe that in long term, it's going to be better for Notre Dame because they're going to get an actual better or a more talented player in there. It's just a matter of do they develop into what Notre Dame expects them to.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately, again, like Ashton Craig is someone they think very highly of. And the biggest thing that Zeke Correll had for him was experience. But I think when you look at raw talent, like the raw talent and the extra size that a guy like Ashton Craig has, for that matter, net result, I think that they're going to be better at center this year. Experience is going to be the only thing. So how does he make the calls? All those different things. Yeah. And like Ryan is saying, and he evaluates guys across the board. He thinks that Ashton's going to be one of the best centers in college football. So I don't disagree with that at all. I think they're going to be in really good shape with Craig at center this year.
So do you think that right now is something that you would consider neutral that can potentially turn into positive? Or are you okay to say you've seen enough from Ashton Craig to call that situation a positive?
I would call it a positive just because we got to see him in game action last year, and we got to see him during spring camp, and he sure looked like he was getting it done during the spring. And again, like when you hear some of the feedback, I think it's going to be a net positive. I don't think there's going to be a drop off with Ashton Craig plugging in there at center. I think this is part of the reason that Correll ultimately left and entered the portal and ended up at NC State this offseason because of the rise of a guy like Craig.
Yeah, and that's, not to sound crude about it, but ultimately when guys transfer like that, the writing's on the wall. You know what I mean? They understand that they're probably, like I said, reach their ceiling, and there's a good chance that someone is going to pass them up, and that's ultimately what's going to happen at the center position. And so to continue on, Ramon Henderson was next. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call this one a negative just because, and I know that, Jordan Clark and Rod Hurd are also coming in, but I really wanted some experience at that position. And I do think, yes, Xavier Watts is going to be on the one side, but there's still questions, about the others. Is it going to be Adon Schuler? Is it going to be Rod Hurd? Maybe Luke Tolich sees some field. I know that they're going to be good in nickel, but I don't know. I was a fan of Ramon Henderson. I think he would have provided some more comfort and depth at the position. So for now, I'm gonna go ahead and say that one's a negative.
Yeah, I would call it. What have you been saying? Positive, negative, neutral. I'm maybe in the neutral because they do have Hurd coming in and Adon Schuler as well. Again, like you lose some experience at the position, but I think we're going to have to kind of wait and see on this a little bit because Hurd, for as experienced as he is and as quickly as it sounds like he's learning the defense, he is still new to the defense, and it is a new position. The upside to a guy like Hurd is at least he has played in the Big Ten as opposed to, when they brought in Antonio Carter last year from Rhode Island, and now Carter leaves Notre Dame and he's at Jacksonville State, where he is. So he is pretty drastically moved back down another level. I think that this was just a level that was too high for him, but again, at least Hurd has played Big Ten competition and, pretty good FBS competition. So even though he hasn't played as much safety, I think you can feel pretty confident in that. And there's still a lot of, upside for a guy like Schuler or Talich even in some of those guys, but they're just unproven right now. So I'd put it a little bit more neutral personally, maybe a little bit negative. It's just a question mark until we really see it happen.
Yeah, I think the next one is easy though. Give me a second here. I think Holden Stays is one of their easier ones because it's just a real big neutral to me, right? Like they have a ton of tight end depth. They always, seem to figure it out at tight end. While Stays, was he having a good season last year? Sure. And do they need to stay healthy at the position with, Mitchell Evans and Eli Raridan? I do believe so. But, I think that this offense is naturally going to transition out of heavy tight end sets. So, having a ton of tight end depth, I don't think is super crucial. So I don't call this a positive or a negative, but losing Holden Staes was really just kind of neutral to me.
Yeah. And I mean, he was there last season, but it was like the way the season started, it looked like Holden Staes was going to be the next, big tight end. But then all of a sudden, Mitchell Evans kind of took over that mantle before Evans got hurt, and you just, you just never kind of saw it come back around. So, this was obviously for him, about getting more of an opportunity to sort of be the guy. But Notre Dame has been able to stock the cupboard pretty well at tight end. So I don't think that I see this as a negative. There's still a ton of talent in that tight end room.
Agreed. So then moving on to the cluster of corners that left, Clarence Lewis, Micah Bell, and Ryan Barnes, that's another one where it's tough because those guys leaving opens the door for your young, stud corners, right? Like we knew that that's who was ultimately going to play, and that's probably why you saw the exodus of that room when you have, Jaden Mickey and Christian Gray, up at the top and guys who are really considered young. And then, let's not forget about Benjamin Morrison, the All-American of the room, right? I think the only reason why this stings a little bit is because of the injury that happened to Benjamin Morrison. And so
Right.
You question kind of the depth there and having to go, potentially with two young corners on the road against Texas A&M to start your season. Like I wouldn't have mind to have Clarence Lewis in there as an assurance policy. The other two, I'm more so like meh about, but I think Clarence Lewis is the one where you kind of sit back and like, dang, I wish we had him right now because he's so familiar with the defense. I think he gives you more comfort. Again, rotating him in with Mickey and Gray and not having to rely on such young corners on the road to start your season.
Clarence Lewis was just tired of being the backup plan.
Yeah.
It's
and
like
it sucks. Everyone wants to be.
Yeah. It's like you break, like girlfriend breaks up with boyfriend, and it's like, oh, let's bounce back to Clarence Lewis now. It's like, oh, Mr. Stability is still there. But ultimately, he didn't want to be just a depth piece. He wanted to be a guy, especially as deep as he is in his career now. Just go get more guaranteed playing time. And that's the kind of move that he made. And that's, basically all three of these corners who decided to leave. That's ultimately their depth pieces. It would be really nice to have a guy like Clarence Lewis with all the experience that he has right now, because there is some uncertainty still, at least until we get through the next, week or two, or maybe even the press conference tomorrow when we hear from Marcus Freeman about Benjamin Morrison's health. I mean, that's one of the bigger questions that the defense has is how healed is BMO and how quickly is he going to get to play. But otherwise, Clarence Lewis was depth, and that's ultimately, and again, Antonio Carter, same thing, depth piece. It didn't look like he was going to make any kind of dent here. Bryce McPherson, a little bit of a head scratcher with the decision that he made, but ultimately they brought in at least someone, again, unproven at this level, but someone with a big leg who they obviously feel pretty highly about with Rendell, the Australian.
Yeah, so kind of like to sum up everything that went on in the secondary between, I think I'm going to now cluster all of them together, the safeties that kind of left and came and the corners that, left and came. I'm going to give that situation, honestly, a neutral for now, just because like I want to see how that plays out. And then I do like, though, that we're going to see that, the Christian Gray and Jaden Mickey in a bigger role. But it still would have been nice to have Clarence Lewis. And then it's just a matter of how these transfer safeties are going to fit in. Is it going to be a good mesh? Is it not going to be a good mesh? Are they going to have, good roles defined in nickel and dime defenses, that sort of stuff? So I think all in all, I'm willing to call that whole situation just neutral, the secondary, because of, that reason. So to kind of, sum it all up, I only had, two negatives, or really just kind of one negative out of the transfer portal, and that was losing some of the young wide receivers. So I think I would be willing to give this overall transfer portal class a B to a B plus range. And that's kind of, I think I'm not quite in that A minus. I think if if I wanted to be an A-, one of those wide receivers, I would have liked to stay, or maybe added somehow, another young wide receiver. But I'm going to stay in that B to B plus range.
I'm in the B plus A minus. One, you add a guy like Riley Leonard, and again, the only thing that kind of hinders that being just like one of the best. It is one of the best moves of the offseason to be able to go out and get Riley Leonard. But the only thing that casts any doubt into it is just how healthy he is going to stay. You lose a great athlete with Chris Tyree, but like when you look at Tyree, Merriweather, Flores, James, and the fact that you go out and you get the kind of replacements, essentially free agents to fill those slots with Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell, and and the kind of experience that they're going to give you, pairing them up, because again, like you already have a new quarterback, so how much difference does it make that you're bringing in a veteran quarterback and you're giving him veteran receivers, and he doesn't have to bring up the entire group of receivers as he plays his way in here, especially when he did miss most of the spring as well. So I think, and then of course they strategically plugged those other holes with some transfers as well. So I think that it was really good. B plus A minus is my grade that I give for the transfer portal.
Well, at least we're in like that same range, right? And I like this comment by Sloppy Joe.
And Joe did, like, it took us a long way to get here, but Joe said B plus right off the bat. So we came all the way back around to the grade that Joe had. All we had to do was throw B plus up there, and I guess we could have moved on. Mike says it's an A, so like I think we're kind of all in that.
Well, range. I like this one, B plus with an A ceiling, because if the secondary pans out and everything is fine, you know what I mean? And I'd be willing to say that as well. That my grade would shift up to an A, but it's pending on, how the secondary responds essentially. And I'm not worried about the secondary, because I think Al Golden and Mike Mickens are fantastic coaches. I think that's all going to resolve itself. But I'm a person of concrete facts. Like, I have to see it happen before I'm willing to say, that it's an upgrade, essentially.
Right. By the way, all the smoke chiming in on the purge of the Irish Gordian knot. He says he's late, but catching up. He said he played for an NAIA title at Missouri Valley, and his buddies who did play D1 level didn't have nearly as difficult of a fall camp or summer conditioning. So again, it's like football's football, man. Like, you still start of camp, all those different things. What level?
Who do you think that these coaches are learning from?
Right.
You know what I mean? They have mentors and friends that also coach at a higher level that they're constantly talking to, refining their things. And, that was always an emphasis, is like, we are following, this template of how, other programs go about things. And as much as it pains me to say, my first season at Siena Heights, and actually it's 10 years now, because we just got sent the 10-year reunion. We won our conference championship that season as a freshman, which is funny because it's like the least, impact that you have as a true freshman, but
sure.
Still a cool time. But our head coach at the time, before we transitioned to a different coach during my career, he was a Michigan man. He loved Bo Schembechler. We ran our program just like Bo Schembechler. We had
You can bet he was probably working Bo Schembechler camps back in the day.
His son,
all that kind of stuff.
His son went to to Michigan, and he was on the coaching staff. So all of these things, it comes back kind of full circle. So it's not a matter of NAI, D1, D2. It's just, again, the level of athlete.
The biggest difference, I think, just kind of watching, some of the practices and different things that I saw. The biggest difference is just the amount of money that's there and the kind of facilities that you have in comparison to Division. Just in terms of how football actually works, I don't think that's much different. And let's not forget Kalen DeBoer, who just played for a championship, 7 months ago, and is now the head coach at Alabama. Started off by winning NAIA championships with his climb up the ladder. So football's football. at
To
the end of
answer
the day.
Ryan's question, the answer is yes, Ryan. That is
Yes.
where I attended.
So let's talk about coaching staff turnover, because Stymie chimed in here early. He says, can I vote coaching was the biggest improvement of the offseason? So let's kind of go through real quickly. Of course, the maybe the most stunning of the offseason coaching moves was the purge of Chancey Stuckey. Just a day after Marcus Freeman said that he had no intentions of making any moves. Chancey Stuckey is gone, the wide receivers coach. They bring in Mike Brown. That was the first move. Jared Parker leaves as offensive coordinator, becomes the head coach at Troy. They hire Mike Denbrock. They lose the safeties coach, Chris O'Leary, who leaves to go to the NFL, Los Angeles Chargers. So Mike Mickens takes over the entire secondary. They bring in Marty Biaggi to help coach the safeties. He's going to coach safeties in addition to special teams. And because Mike Mickens took over the entire secondary, they didn't have to bring in anyone from the outside. Max Bulla goes from grad assistant to full-time assistant coach, coaching the linebackers. And of course, they went the entire season with an interim strength and performance coach, and they hire Lauren Lando to come in as performance coach as well. So what's your initial assessment of the coaching churn?
Yeah, so to start, I'm going to kind of treat it, similar. I think the Chauncey Stuckey, Mike Brown situation is an overall plus, even though, there's a lot of criticism for the recruiting struggles that are going on. I'm more so worried about what's in the room now and what's on your roster now. And I think they have good wide receivers on the roster now. And I think Mike Brown is going to do more for these wide receivers, older and younger in terms of development. So I'm going to give that one a plus, just because it's just, you can't create a divide as a coach. And so I think it would have taken a lot for me to say that this was ever going to be a minus or a neutral. So I'll give the Mike Brown situation a plus. Jared Parker leaving to become the head coach of Troy.
Let me just kind of add on that. Essentially, even though there is some fan disgruntlement with what happened with the three wide receivers a few weeks ago, and obviously the initial returns on the recruiting aren't what people want. I think how Mike Brown is ultimately, like, the biggest thing we're going to have to judge Mike Brown on is the production of the wide receivers this season and what that looks like on the field. And at least the initial things that we have seen and heard is that it is going to be an upgrade, because that's like Stuckey could recruit. We saw that with that freshman class that he brought in last year, but we weren't seeing the development at the level it needed to be. And then when you started hearing the stories about all the dysfunction was going on, that was just a huge, huge wrench that was thrown into the machinery. So I think at least initially, I'll call it neutral to slight positive. I think I do have to call it a positive. The recruiting thing is obviously going to be the biggest piece.
Right.
Mike Brown is, but like if things work out on the field this season, I think that people are going to get over some of that.
That's what I mean. And that's what we've talked about a lot the last couple of weeks is, just offense going out there, wide receivers having, success, seeing what this offense looks like under, Mike Denbrock at Notre Dame. I just think if you're a wide receiver, there's nothing telling you, yes, I want to go to Notre Dame because of, what happened at the end of last season. You're now transitioning into another new offense for your second straight season, different offensive coordinator. There's just so many things kind of moving around that, it's just going to take some time. And so the better they do and the more success they have this season, which is going to happen, these recruits are naturally going to start opening up more to Notre Dame and Mike Brown. So again, this is a positive situation overall to me.
And then you go from Jared Parker, very raw offensive coordinator, obviously, albeit a guy who put a lot of points on the board with the exception of the big games, to hiring Mike Denbrock, who just coached Heisman Trophy winner.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really need to discuss this one too much. This is like plus. Like
pluses across the board.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
I wish Jared Parker well at Troy, but like this is Notre Dame. Like this is, I don't know. I think there's a certain level of expectation for the offense, and I think it's going to perform better this season.
I concur.
Next up would be safeties coach O'Leary, and then Mike Mickens / Biaggi kind of taking over the secondary reins now. I'm going to just give this one neutral, and I'm going to say neutral on this one because it's never a good thing to lose a coach to the NFL, right? Like if an NFL coach or if an NFL team wants your coach, there's probably a reason for that. He's a really good coach. But the reason why I can't say this is a negative is because I believe in Mike Mickens and I believe in the upside and the potential he has, but he's never run a full secondary before. So I have to go neutral on this one for that reason until, we see Mike Mickens in full action as the lead in the secondary.
I'm gonna go positive. Like what we're gonna get to the recruiting here in a minute. I'm gonna go positive just because, again, like talking to the players in the spring and hearing some of Brian's intel that he's had, I think that there is going to be, a lot more cohesion in the secondary in general, having it all under one umbrella now, where these guys are together more and kind of philosophically just on the same page more with one guy. I'm gonna go positive on this, and again, like how this looks a year from now, 2 years from now, when we start to look at recruiting and things like that. I think that we're going to start to see really, really nice net gains, continued gains in that department as well. So I'm gonna go positive on it. And like coupled with that, again, is the fact that you were able to do this internally and you didn't have to go externally, and you bring in a guy like Bulla, who everyone is, raving about with his personality and all that kind of stuff. Like that seemed to be a pretty easy decision. And so for a guy who's got the experience that Max Bulla has, and we saw good results from him essentially running the show last year as the grad assistant as it was. So to be able to make that kind of guy a full-time assistant coach, kind of when you couple that in there, I think that, again, ultimately this is a really good net move that they were able to make.
Yeah, same. And I that leads me into, Max Bulla as well. I think he's going to be a terrific linebackers coach. I think he's someone who needed the opportunity. And if Notre Dame didn't give it to him, I think other programs would have gladly, gave Max Bulla that opportunity. And then Lauren Landau, I think that, that's another one that's TBD, right? Because how can you judge a strength and conditioning coach until we start to see strength and conditioning come into play? But in terms of, his background, his resume, in terms of, like the guy trains Christian McCaffrey and, amongst other NFL, stars. And I think the main thing is he aligns with Marcus Freeman's philosophy in terms of, what they want to accomplish and how they want to go about it and what, metrics are important to them in today's game. What kind of things are they training for, measuring, injury prevention, that sort of stuff. So I'll give that situation, the hiring of Lauren Landau as a positive for me.
I'm a little bit more neutral on Lando for right now, just because I need to see, even like this spring still had some hamstring injuries and stuff like that going on. There's definitely a philosophical shift going from Bayless to Lando in terms of Bayless was more a, like just add brute strength kind of guy, where Lando's training is a lot more explosiveness, those kind of things, explosiveness, more agility, athleticism, based on building those kind of things. But again, I have to see it get into the season, and we need to see some reduction in some of those soft tissue injuries that we saw so much of last year with kind of the old philosophy. So I'm neutral until I see it in use during the season, especially when we get to November and hopefully into December, when we're talking about college football playoff games. Like, how healthy are guys then? What's the stamina? Are they still moving guys off the line? All those kind of things that you really don't see until later in the season. So I'm going to go a little more neutral with Lando for now. But ultimately, I think, again, like when you look at the moves that were made, you lost a good coach in O'Leary, but you gained like across the board a lot of really good coaches, and you get, consistency, all those different things within the program. You keep some of that. So this is an easy A for me, the coaching churn that they had this offseason. And you get, again, like when you go to a guy like Mike Brown, I still don't think you can underrate sort of, like having a guy who has experience with both Mike Freeman and Marcus Freeman rather, and Mike Denbrock, and Gino Gaduli for that matter, having that, that experience that these guys have all worked together in the past, and just in terms of staff cohesiveness and that kind of thing. I don't think you can underrate guys being on the same page.
Yeah, my final grade is an A-.
Okay. You're A-. I'm A. I think that some other people were jumping in, with some A pluses even. So I can live with that. Now, I think recruiting, is it complicated? Is it easy? Like the 2024 class that they signed, of course, the early enrollees, or, like the early signing period. You bring in CJ Carr, you bring in Kingston Viliamu Asa, you bring in Bryce Young, 11 4 to 5 stars. Carr becomes the program's first pre-bowl, early enrollee. Blue chip ratio, like when you start to look at blue chip ratio, that's the one thing, like the last couple of classes, like the 2024 class ended up being 47%, but you've got a guy like CJ Carr. And as we've talked about before, like when you look at Clemson and kind of the way Dabo Swinney was building that thing up, it wasn't always, like he didn't have, like an elite blue chip ratio all the time, but he was bringing in Deshaun Watson's and Trevor Lawrence's, and even DJ Uiagalelei, who hasn't necessarily performed at that 5-star rating, but he was still up there as well. So like the 24 class that Marcus Freeman signed, 47% blue chip. The 25 class currently has a 42%, 9 4-star guys, currently 21 commits. Deuce Knight is still part of that class. We don't know exactly what's going to happen there, but you look at the 22 and the 23 classes, 81% and 82%. And of course, that includes Kenny Minchie in the 23 class as well. So the blue chip ratio has dipped. Infamously, I guess, like the things that happen with the wide receivers, plural, not great, but they're going to stay in on some guys and hopefully flip some guys before it's all said and done. And then, of course, you lose Ivan Taylor, and that was, kind of dovetailed into the Chris O'Leary thing, the reason Taylor ultimately decided to decommit and then commit to Michigan. So how do you look at this ultimately with how this offseason has gone in terms of recruiting overall?
It's a tough one. And I was hoping to maybe open up more so to dialogue, because, recruiting is the one area I would say I would lack the most knowledge on the most. But, I guess the thing that I would kind of look at on paper first is, does the blue chip ratio concern you at all compared to, 2022 and 2023? I understand 2025 is still, that has room for fluctuation. 2024 probably is majority is what it is, right? So like, does that sort of, do those ratios make you feel uneasy about anything?
And Ryan might be able to chime in on this a little bit, but since he's in the chat right now, and and he's talking about the new Deuce Knight thing, you would definitely like them, I think, to at least be closer to 60 or 70%, even if you're not hitting 80%, as long as you've got the CJ Carrs, the Kenny Minchies, the Deuce Knights in the class, the Noah Grubbs on down the line. But, as of right now, Knight is still committed to Notre Dame. But there's no doubt, like when you look at a 42% blue chip ratio as it is, if you lose a guy like Knight out of there, that's going to drop off. Yeah, and like Ryan is saying, 70% is ideal, and that's kind of what I'm thinking as well.
But do you think that these are issues that a lot of programs are seeing because of, new NIL, transfer portal, that sort of stuff? That's always been my question is, those sort of things now level the playing field. So is this hurting everyone? Is this a dip? Is this a trend, or is this just, something that's only affecting Notre Dame? Is this a trend across college football or not? Because if you're looking at it, in comparison to the last couple of seasons, and I would say right now I would feel kind of negative because of where those blue chip ratios are ultimately at. And that's where I'm starting to kind of figure out or come up with, the why of things. Like is why we know Marcus Freeman's a really good recruiter. You know what I mean? And
if Deuce Knight leaves, there's no doubt that cash money, straight cash, homie, like that's going to play into this, right? Like if he ends up at Auburn, money is going to be a big factor. Just like Tanu Hines ending up at USC, the upfront money that they were giving him is going to be a factor. And there are others as well. And Ryan is saying Notre Dame is trusting their evaluations over recruiting rankings. Only time will tell.
Okay, that helps.
I'm in on that, but that's also a Brian Kelly, line. Like part of his, how he, would kind of justify some of the classes that he had. It's like, well, these are our own evaluations. We're taking that over recruiting rankings. So it's going to be a matter of whose eyes you trust more, Marcus Freeman's, I think, or Brian Kelly, for example. And again, as long as you have one of these big stud quarterbacks who are part of the class, you can stomach that ratio being a little bit lower. But if you start losing the quarterbacks, whether or not NIL and upfront pay for play and those kind of things come into play, but that's still going to impact that class. You like, because that, as we've talked about it again and again and again, and and again, Ryan knows much more about recruiting than I do, and so does Brian for that matter. But as we've been touting with Marcus Freeman, where he has been able to make these the biggest impact is Ryan saying, I'm pretending like Brian Kelly evaluated recruits. Okay. All right. So he can evaluate golf courses. The biggest jump, though, that Marcus Freeman has been able to make is the quality of the quarterbacks. CJ Carr, Kenny Minchie,
right,
Deuce Knight. Again, if Deuce Knight ends up out of the class, then that's a big hit to the 25 class. But as long as they can keep hitting on these more elite quarterbacks, that's going to go a long way ultimately. But what's your grade for recruiting? I've got to put it C plus B minus, I think. Now, again, like a little bit of that has to do with the uncertainty. I think it's almost more fair right now to say incomplete, because if they're able to keep Deuce around, then I think that I'm even in the B plus range. But that would be a big hit if they're not able to keep him around.
I think I am at a C right now. Well, if everything stands and Deuce Knight stays, I'd give this class a B minus. If Deuce Knight ends up leaving, I think that drops me down to almost a C.
Right.
Maybe even potentially C minus range. But that's to be determined. But yeah,
again, I think there's only so much you can do if you're Notre Dame, because they're not going to get into the pay for play thing.
Right.
Like it stinks and it's going to hit your recruiting class if it happens, but there's still only so much you can do because Notre Dame's just not going to go down that road.
Right. So I'm B minus right now today.
I think that I'm kind of in that same boat as well. So ultimately, I think that we give it, like if you average everything out, I think we're in like the B plus offseason is kind of where we end up.
Yeah, so I was at A minus, B plus, and B minus. So like if we did, like a GPA thing and 3 was a B and 4 was an A, we'd be at like a 3.5. So yeah, I would say that we're right on that. I'd say like that B plus A minus range is kind of, I think, where everything falls.
That's kind of what I'm thinking as well, which is, again, all things considered, it's a good off season. And now it's a matter of how they kind of put that into action. Recruiting, we won't know until, December when everything shakes out. Are they able to flip some guys? Are they able to keep everybody together who they think they're going to at this point? It's that's kind of one that's just kind of always in flux. Ryan says, make sure to weight your grades.
So which one of these has, which one of these is a 4 credit class and which one of these is a 2 credit class?
I know.
Is transfer portal your big dog because it has the most impact this season? Coaching, you know what I mean? Because it's like recruiting is so in the future, right? So to me, that holds less weight because we're talking about today, this season. And so, I mean, if we're doing a weighted grade, I'd feel more comfortable in the A minus range just because the recruiting is what's kind of ultimately dragging me down a little bit.
Sly Fox has been doing a lot of venting. It's okay.
But you're not doing it negatively,
Right.
Like you're doing it in a constructive manner. And that's the important part.
There's Sly Fox vetting and there's Ted Power venting, and Irish Gordian not, obviously. But we might not have to deal with either one of those again at this point. So that's right. It's okay to vent. Keep it somewhat constructive.
Nice, calm, constructive manager.
That's all. Brent, our resident 49ers fan, saying Brock Purdy has apparently added 10 miles an hour to the old fastball. Imagine the ability to throw.
I hope so. That would be such a gain. Like, I don't know. Did he go to I don't know why I can't think of it right now, but all those MLB pitchers in the offseason go to this basically this just like
the
facility.
Drive line. Yeah.
Did he go to Drive Line for quarterbacks over the off season and figure out how to get more rotations on that bad boy, get more, spin coming out of the hand? So, I mean, if that's true, obviously it makes him and that offense even more scary, right? Because now Shanahan can design even more plays that he can start threading the ball through. So, I mean, if it's true, that's amazing, but that's a lot in one off season.
Jesse, are you ready for rapid fire?
Let's do this.
We better get moving because Jesse's got
We're on schedule.
His, work, his activities planned.
Just say it. It's yoga.
Tonight. Yeah. So which is the more important offseason addition for Notre Dame? Riley Leonard or Mike Denbrock?
This is an easy one for me. Short term, Riley Leonard. Long term, Mike Denbrock. But to me, long term is going to outweigh the short term because this thing is about developing quarterbacks, right? Notre Dame says that they want to not go to the transfer portal as soon as possible. Well, how does that happen? You have to develop quarterbacks and wide receivers and all the things above. And I think also when you factor in, what this offense is going to be able to do under Mike Denbrock, it's going to gain popularity and attention from recruits, all down the line. And so I have to say that my answer would be Mike Denbrock. And it's really, really easy because you can't get caught up in a 1 year, 1 year thing when you got to think of like the 5 year, 10-year long-term investment. I think Mike Denbrock is going to do far more in 5 to 10 years than what Riley Leonard's going to do in 1 year.
See, I thought I was the one cheating by doing it the way you answered it because I do agree with the short-term, long-term. Short-term, it is definitely Riley Leonard because even if they hadn't, like if Jared Parker was still here and they were still running that offense that everyone was going to be complaining about going into the season, like even if Jared Parker was still, and remember, Riley Leonard essentially had committed to Notre Dame, kind of like Sam Hartman, under a different offensive coordinator. Both of these transfer portal quarterbacks made their decisions, committed to Notre Dame when one guy was the offensive coordinator, then they ended up with another offensive coordinator. I think the net result for Riley Leonard is definitely going to be even more positive having a guy like Mike Denbrock. But I do think that Leonard is the short-term answer because he was brought here not just to win 9 or 10 games, but to win
playoff
games that matter and get them to the playoffs and be able to win playoffs and hopefully get them, closer to being a national championship contender, if not actually being one this year, coupled with the defense. But as you said, the way things worked out, the fact that you do have Mike Denbrock, like him coupled with Riley Leonard, and then coupled with a CJ Carr, a Deuce Knight, and Noah Grubbs, these guys down the line, that's going to give you the chance to consistently, obviously, compete for the national championships. So my short-term answer is Riley Leonard, but my long-term answer is Mike Denbrock. So maybe I'm cheating a little bit, but I do think that you can differentiate them like that, both short-term and long-term. I think Denbrock is going to have a huge impact on Notre Dame's offense going forward, especially with the kind of quarterbacks that they're bringing in. So keep reeling them in, basically. Fill in the blank. The Notre Dame player you're most intrigued with heading into fall camp is blank.
So before I answer this, I just want a slight clarification because it's gonna alter my answer here. Are we talking about like impact, or are we talking about like intriguing because of someone who might like earn a starting spot that maybe wouldn't?
This is an open book. This is any way you want to look at this. This is whatever perspective you want to take on. Who intrigues you the most?
This is a very tough question.
And I like that so far of the answers that we've got in the chat. John says the punter. Brent says Adon Schuler.
There's another one.
Joe says RJ Oben. Anthony says Jeremiah Love. 4 people have 4 different answers.
So my heart wants to say Jeremiah Love.
DK's going with Riley Leonard,
that's not
probably just so he can keep the train going.
That's not my answer. My heart wants to say Jeremiah Love, and the reason I want to say Jeremiah Love is because I think he has potentially the most impact on this offense outside of Riley Leonard, because they still need to be able to run the ball, and losing Audric Estime is a big piece of running the ball and the production that he provided, in terms of scoring touchdowns, right? Like Riley Leonard is going to help offset some of that because his ability to run the ball, but they're also asking Jeremiah Love to be able to catch the ball out of the backfield. So he's going to have his handprints are going to be on this offense. I think at the end of the day, he's talented enough that he is going to be fine. And so that's why I'm not going to say Jeremiah Love. Who I'm really going to say is Jaden Greathouse, because I think a young wide receiver needs to take over and show that they can be a star at Notre Dame. And I think if Jaden Greathouse has a huge monster season, then this offense, sky is the limit. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if they can have someone step up and be a difference, just an absolute difference maker on offense, I think he has a great opportunity to break out because he showed so many flashes last season of talent, and he was so young. He had the production. He was, he made big plays. A lot of them were touchdowns. It's like slug in baseball. Like when Jaden Greathouse touched the ball, it was likely a big play or a touchdown. And so I want to see that carry over this season, a full season of health, maybe close to 1,000-yard receiver, because I really think that's going to set this offense over the top.
Yeah, and same but different. My most intriguing guy is Bo Collins, because for some of the things that you're talking about, like you said, it would be great if one of these young Notre Dame receivers, especially kind of a homegrown guy with Greathouse going into the sophomore season.
I want to see a wide receiver actually go through the whole cycle of Notre Dame, develop and come out as an NFL wide receiver again. I need a Golden Tate. I need a Michael Floyd. I need someone of those caliber again to start to finish, develop into an elite wide receiver at Notre Dame.
Right. And there is definitely intrigue in terms of exactly how Jaden Greathouse is used, because you have these guys at the other positions. But going back to the spring, they were talking about, look, we're going to move Jaden Greathouse around. He's not just going to be a slot receiver. And I think one of the more important aspects of this whole thing is, how they're able to not just play Jaden Greathouse, like how they get Greathouse and Faison on the field at the same time, and then potentially Chris Mitchell as well, and Bo Collins as well. And that's why my answer is Bo Collins. Tommy with his Bo show. That's right. Salty's got his great one. Tommy's got his Bo show. And that's why I'm going with Bo Collins, because they need that. Like, I think that one of those two guys can definitely be that go-to, but because of the experience that Collins has, bringing him in, pairing him up with an experienced quarterback like Riley Leonard as well, just that I think that he can be that kind of consistent go-to guy that they've obviously lacked the last few years. We've talked about this before, Jess. The offense really for the last 5 years now, from a passing standpoint, has run through the tight end, which gives you short to intermediate game, basically. I think
no explosion.
Yeah, I think that a guy like Collins, a guy like Greathouse as well.
Let's just
running it through them.
Let's keep it real. I mean, if you want to contend in the playoffs and be a team that can win it all, do you think your offense should work through tight ends, or do you think your offense should work through fast, agile wide receivers?
It's got to go through. I mean, that's the lesson that they supposedly learned in 2020 when they lost to Alabama. The way that Alabama
saw the difference on the field.
Right. The way that Alabama was able to exploit the perimeter of the field in ways that Notre Dame couldn't. And I think that Mike Denbrock, I think he touched on that a little bit this spring. Like, that's a thing for him as well. And again, like with less 12 personnel and more 11 and 10 personnel and 21 personnel, those kind of things. If you have Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price on the field at the same time, I think that we finally get to see that this year, whether it's Greathouse or Collins. So Collins is the guy who intrigues me, in part because we didn't get to see him with these guys in the spring. But Ryan saying Chris Mitchell, and I think that there's some intrigue there as well. And you touched on it earlier in the show. Like, he is coming from Florida International. Speed does travel, but he's still got to show that he can do it at a higher level than he did at Florida International.
I think that's what makes this question fun, though, is because I struggle between Chris Mitchell, Jaden Greathouse, and even Bo Collins, right? It's like you can make a case for all three of them. And I think that's, as long as they're all productive and one guy kind of separates themselves, I don't care who it is. Just someone needs to take charge, essentially. But personally would prefer Jaden Greathouse because he's younger, and I want someone to continue to develop at Notre Dame and not just get, the 1 year out of the grad transfer and then they move on. I want a guy, again, full cycle at Notre Dame, has more than one productive season.
Brent wants us to compare and contrast Riley Leonard's 22 to 23 seasons. Okay, 22 was great. It was a breakout season. He had, he was throwing the ball all over the place. He was running the ball all over the place. 23, he was hurt. So, what more? I don't know how, what other comparison you need. 23 started off like it was going to look like 22, but the injury kind of put a damper on things. Fill in the blank. It's blank that Notre Dame advertised 2 tickets to the home game against Northern Illinois for $150 or 4 tickets for $200 on its social media platforms.
To me, it's criminal. Because you got to offer, who's buying 2 tickets to that game for $150, right? I don't even think that should be an option. In terms of those games like Northern Illinois, Miami of Ohio, you got to do things to come up with the best package deal as possible and get as many, seats filled in the entire stadium. So I like the incentive of, for $50 more, now you can get 4 tickets.
Yeah.
Instead of 2 tickets. I love that
that's
concept.
The deal. But that's the deal, right?
But why even have the 2 for $150? Just open up tickets for $50. You know what I mean? It shouldn't even be
sell that
an option
part of
in the
bowl,
first place. Just
for $50 a piece.
Just give the people what they want. It's Miami of Ohio. It's Northern Illinois. Those are the games where you should really market locals. People who maybe, are true huge Notre Dame fans. Maybe they don't have the time, resources, whatever you might say, to be able to attend as many Notre Dame games as possible, or maybe not even, those top tier games. And so I think you have to reward loyal fans and give them a fair, honest, price to these games that you're going to have a little bit of a struggle with selling out.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest. This is what happens when you have two MAC teams on the home schedule in the same season. There's not going to be demand for all these games because essentially having one of these games, one MAC team on the schedule, I mean, it's already an opportunity for, to me, a lot of locals who maybe have never gone to a game or haven't gotten to go to a game before. Joe Allen said he bought 3 for $150 for Miami, Ohio.
Great
so that's
deal.
That's $50
They
a piece
usually
right there. You should have held out and gone to Northern Illinois, Joe. Come on. What are you talking about? But yeah, I mean, it's an opportunity for people who don't, get to go to games to not have to shell out premium price, and you get to go to a Notre Dame home football game. But like you said, I was a little surprised to see that as well. And I think, a month or two ago, we had that thing about Costco is teaming up with all these different programs. Rutgers, I think, was one of them. Some of these other programs selling discounted tickets at Costco. And honestly, I don't know what it entails when you partner up with Costco, like how much money that the school has to give up to sell them there, or any of that kind of stuff. But this is essentially the kind of deal that you would find at Costco to get tickets at that price. And you're right. Just sell them for $50 a piece to begin with.
The whole, 75.
I mean, $50 a piece is that is the year 2000 era pricing. That's what, you could still get a ticket in that upper part of the stadium. They were selling them pretty regularly for $50 a piece back then. So this is this is 25 years ago prices that they're selling these things for. So Clontarf says some YouTubers not buying in on Mitchell's speed. What do we think? I mean, I don't know who these YouTubers are. I mean, one we're doing
fast is fast, no matter what field you're on, who you're being guarded by. Straight line speed is speed.
The biggest question is he going to be able to, break free from higher end Power 5 DB type guys?
Right, exactly. What kind of separation is he creating against better DBs? The speed is still going to be there.
60-70% of the schedule, he's going to have a much higher gear than most of those guys that he's going to be going up against who are trying to defend him. Northern Illinois, Miami, Ohio, Army, Navy, whoever it happens to be. Speed is speed, regardless of level. Now, he's going to get a chance to show it at a much higher level this year. Again, part of the reason that he's at Notre Dame. So Domer Grizz had this one on We In, We Out yesterday, and it slipped past me. I didn't use it on yesterday's show. So it's fitting that you're here because he says Jesse's sleeper pick of Australian punter James Rendell in the 8th round of the breakout prediction draft will be both deserved and unfounded because most games we won't punt often enough to matter, but a game or two will actually need him to flip the field to win the game. We in or we out on that?
So first of all, 2 questions. One, were you able to post said draft into the boards yet? Is it in?
I forgot. I have not done that, but I've still got it on my notebook, so I can plug it in at any time.
As long as we do it before camp starts, season starts, that's all I care about. Second question would be, or not even. This is even a question. Domer Grizz. This isn't a sleeper. This is what wins me this entire draft. Okay. We are in on this because I agree. It will be unfounded at times when we're kicking the crap out of these teams.
It's not going to matter. There's not
field
be
position,
1 or 2 punts a game.
Yeah. What does field position matter? Right. At some point, we're going to feel bad. Probably, get stopped here and there, whatever. Right. But in the big games, when, the Ohio States of last season, when every possession mattered, or, potentially Florida State, maybe USC or Louisville this season. Maybe, people feel about Virginia and Georgia Tech. At some point, the position battle is going to come up, and we're going to have a punter that can now 10 people inside their own 10, 25, whatever it might be. And that's going to be crucial. And so I am 100% in on this, that it is unfounded and it's going to be boring most of the time. But when it matters most, it is actually going to be very important.
I mean, what's he going to be like when those bright lights come on? He's going to find out right away.
Game one.
Texas A&M. That's right. I mean, like it's, like baptism under fire, basically. I mean, I'm in on this as well. They obviously feel very confident in this guy, and I'll be curious to see if we get to see him put foot to ball tomorrow, the first day of training camp. Exactly what that looks like, because that is a position, regardless of if you have uniforms and pads and all that stuff on, where you can go out and kind of show what you can do. We'll get a chance to see him in person for the first time. But I'm in, because I think that ultimately it's going to come down to a handful of punts where he's actually going to have some opportunity to flip the field and let that defense go to work. So I'm in. I think it's good rationale. Antoine posted this one in the chat last night during Rapid Fire, and I didn't get to this one as well. Here's his theory. He says, all this talk that we've had recently about the teams playing in the conference championship games, and are they going to be hurt, if they lose the conference championship game for seeding in the college football playoff and that kind of thing. So with all that in mind, he says the number one team from a conference at the end of the season should not play in their conference championship game, but instead the number 2 and number 3 teams should play. So I'm curious to hear your response to this, because I had one sort of initial reaction to this when I saw it. And then as I kind of thought things through, I changed my mind a little bit. So what do you think?
Maybe we're thinking some of the same initial thoughts, but, initially I believe that this is a good idea in terms of, I think the regular season should largely speak for itself in terms of conference championships. And, the one game at the very end, I get it. It's basically, it's nice to have when maybe you have a rematch of a close game, right? So you maybe want like validation or verification of what happened during the first outcome. But still, it's the totality of the season, and I have more weight on that than I do the actual conference championship game. And then where this took me next is the impact on seeding, because if you start having all of these upsets in the playoffs where, maybe you have a 12-0 conference champ regular season that plays the 2 seed 10-2 champ. Well, now you got a conference champ that's got 2 losses and 1 loss, and now you got to figure out how to reseed everyone, right? And so I think in terms of seeding, it helps out a lot, because basically that 2 or 3 is fighting for their playoff spot at the end of the day, right? And 1 has already been kind of locked in because they did what they were supposed to in the regular season. And so when I'm thinking of it in that logic, I think it's a great idea. But then now you invite the opportunity for an even lower level team, like a third, seed, to get into the playoffs.
And I understand what you're saying. And those were kind of some of the initial thoughts that I had in terms of, okay, you're not going to hurt the number 1. But here's the problem. The way the rules are written in the college football playoff in terms of buys and selections, the top 4 highest rated conference champions get the first round buys.
Yeah, so you got to be a conference
champ. So that you've got to play in the conference championship game if you want a chance to get one of those first round buys. So that's ultimately, again, I was thinking, along the lines of a lot of the stuff that you were saying there, but then it ultimately comes down to none of that matters, because you've got to be a conference champion to get one of the first round playoff buys. So it would, like you could both help and hurt the 2 and 3 seeds by putting them in that game, but the number 1 seed is ultimately not going to benefit because of the fact that you've got to win the conference.
What if a 3 beats a 2 and the 3 was already unfit, and now the 2 becomes unfit? Now both teams, ultimately would lose out, right? And so, and Indy Saylor brings up a good point. Then it's not a conference championship game because you don't have the 2 best teams, right? It's just, I think the overall question is, conference championships feel to me, and maybe it's just because Notre Dame doesn't play in a conference, right? So I don't know the meaning of it and all, all of that sort of stuff. But like, they just feel pointless at the end of the day because and especially with the expanded playoff and all that. Like, I value the regular season championship more than anything. So
I do
if
too.
you just want to crown your championship right after the season,
Yeah.
and that fits the criteria of, highest rated conference champ goes into the playoffs, I'm perfectly happy with that. I think that the best solution is just to get rid of these conference championship games, especially because we have the expanded playoff format now, and just allow the entirety of the season, like it does for the playoff seeding, be, what dictates conference championships.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think these conferences, I think there's a good chance they're going to eliminate them after a few years. And again, like how the first few years play out and how their teams are affected by these conference championship games as it comes to playoff seeding, they'll make the decision. But D-Troll Hunter, I don't disagree. Just declare the regular season champ and go to the playoff, and that way you're not going to hurt your teams. But the reason they do this is for the money. So are they going to, and part of this, at least for the short term, is the conference championship games are part of the TV contracts. So it's not like they can just eliminate them right now because they're taking money from the TV networks for televising those games as well. That's part of the revenue that comes from that. So it'll be a few years down the line, but I would not be shocked if we start seeing conferences just ultimately get rid of their conference championship games, like Big 12, ACC come to mind, because I think that those two conferences compared to the SEC and the Big 10 stand to lose the most based on how their conference championship game plays out. So NBC has told its broadcasters in Olympic broadcasting workshops not to use we and us during broadcasts, even though they played for Team USA. Do you buy or sell that philosophy, Jess?
Yeah, I buy that. I buy this philosophy not only for the Olympics, but for across all professional and college sports. And I know it's hard because I'm guilty of it at times of when you're in a passionate discussion argument as a fan or fan base. You often say we, but I always think that there should be a differentiate. The we as in the players who play, and the we as the fans who are cheering on the team, right? Because they're two separate things. The team and the fans don't go through the same stuff. And, the team obviously is putting in the work and the hours, and the fans are, obviously watching and on standby and that sort of stuff. And so this is something I've thought about, but I don't know what the solution is, but I definitely agree of you like staying away from those kind of, what's the word? Not possessive, but, basically including yourself in there as a fan and not a player. Blech.
This has always been like, where my line is drawn, broadcasting, whether it's college or high school or whatever level of games, to avoid using we and us. That is always, regardless of how excited I might get during a call or anything like that, we and us is eliminated during the broadcast. But I think there's a difference between whether you're calling a professional sports game, a college game, a high school game, as opposed to the Olympics, because I agree with what Stymie is saying. For an Olympic broadcast, I don't mind them being homers, because it's like if you're doing an NFL game, for example, you're doing Chiefs 49ers in the Super Bowl. You've got one set of fans who are, for the Chiefs and another for the 49ers. And obviously you don't want network TV broadcasters or even, network TV radio broadcasters going down that avenue, because you're going to tick off one side or the other. When it's the Olympics, we're all in theory, it's on NBC. We're watching an American network TV broadcast. In theory, we're all pulling for the same team, right? So what difference does it make? It's America versus everybody. So I don't have a problem when it comes to
and you bring up a good point, because I don't know about how much you've kind of tuned into the Olympics so far, but Peyton Manning is involved in it this year with NBC, and he's been, like anything else he does, very enjoyable to listen to. And I remember during the opening ceremony, him just giving honest feedback of, I am so jealous of every athlete out here, because I never got the chance to compete for something better than, greater than me. I competed for owners, millionaires, those sort of things. And so it's different when you're competing for your nation, representing your country, and not just, again, the people that are writing your paycheck essentially at the end of the day. And I think that falls along, with your argument too. It becomes more of a, we as the United States are rooting on everyone as much as possible. So I like the answer of in the Olympics, I have more leeway, but like you said, when it's, this team versus this team, and, more so into, the ownership and that sort of side of things, I think it's harder to get into the we and us type narrative.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they've done a good job. I feel like, just the way they've gone about it, they're obviously following the rules, but, at the same time, again, it's like when you listen to Dan Hicks and Rowdy Gaines in the pool, with the exception of when the French guy won the gold a couple of days ago, it's like it's obvious who they're broadcasting to, an American audience. They get appropriately excited, when the Americans do well. Okay, so here's another one from the show chat last night. Everyone at IB can run a faster 40 time than Brian Kelly. Are you in or are you out on that?
This is a very, I can't believe you posed this question, because it can it could have repercussions. I'm going to say we out, but I'm not going to name names.
I'm going to go out, and I am going to name names, because I feel like that Dario guy is a total sloth, and I don't think he could cut it.
Man, I want to see him on the live show when you tell him that, because I think he thinks he could beat Brian Kelly.
I think you could give Dario a 5-yard start, and BK still might beat him. I'm mostly saying this to see if he'll pay attention.
If he'll pay attention.
Let's, like if Ryan was still here, maybe I'd be in on this. But, DK just throwing it right at you. Let's just face it, Jesse. You weren't D1, so there's no way that you could run
There's
fast,
no
right?
way I could run faster than Brian Kelly.
Yeah. Like, if you weren't a D1 athlete, there's no way you could run fast enough to run down Brian
This
Kelly.
is a perfect bringing the show full circle.
Yes. I've seen Jesse run, when, like he'd be a, like a wolf chasing down a skinned rabbit, basically, if he was running after Brian Kelly. And like actually, if you put a cheeseburger on Brian Kelly's head, Vince might be able to run him down as well. So
Ryan came with a really good comment here. BK beats everyone if there's golf course and scotch.
Scotch. I like scotch. That's right. All right. Well, that's going to do it for today's show. And if Vince, actually does happen to listen, we love you, of course.
At some point, we just need to do an IB combine. I know that would take a lot, but I think the IB staff will be pretty wrecked the day after, but I think it's what the fans deserve. It's good talking points. We have some baselines, and then we can go from there.
Brent's throwing out his 40 time. He's saying he's 4:47. Brent, you missed the start of the show, what that was in reference to. So that was a little sarcasm, shocker from DK on that one. But maybe go watch the first 10 minutes of the show and you'll find out exactly what that is in reference to. So anyone who happened to miss that, have a good day. Little note on tomorrow. We won't have IB Nation Sports Talk tomorrow night because Brian Driscoll and I will be the two IB guys at practice tomorrow. So once we get all back and settled and he's written up his practice report, and I think, after I've written some stuff up from the Marcus Freeman press conference, sometime tomorrow afternoon, Wonder Twin powers will activate and Brian Driscoll and I will do a show together to talk about the full practice that we get to watch tomorrow at Notre Dame. So Driscoll and I together tomorrow afternoon. No IB Nation Sports Talk Wednesday night. We will be back. Jesse and I will be back Thursday, though. And we'll probably have plenty of stuff that Marcus Freeman said from his press conference on Thursday's show to kind of react to and talk about and stuff like that. Thundercats. That's right. So hit the like button before you leave. We do appreciate it. Football is back, and we'll be talking about plenty of it on tomorrow's show as well. So we will talk to you then on IB Nation Sports Talk.